Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes, and welcome back to the YoVideogames podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Andrew.
And once again, thank you to all our generous patrons who've kept us going for over 400 episodes.
Yeah, if you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please head over to patreon.com/YoVideogames. Dude of the week is Dwyas.
Thank you, Dwyas.
And of course, we've got a sponsor to thank, and I'm talking about Manscaped. Now, they have like all sorts of products that we really love. We've talked about the Beard Hedger Pro. We've talked about the Handyman Razor, which I recently did actually shave my head with, as promised. Did it, and it worked great. I don't know why I was expecting it to be a pain. It was not a pain. I just was in the shower and did it. It took less than 5 minutes. So it was great. It's my first time shaving my head. That felt weird, but it worked wonderfully. But no, we're going to talk about the Lawnmower 5.0, which is a part of the new Performance Package 5.0 that's just coming out. And it's everything that you love about the old lawnmower, which I have the Lawnmower 4.0 here. You can see a size difference. It's more spaceship. It's more designed, but it has a brighter light, a more powerful motor, as far as I could tell. Still all the skin-safe technology. Still, you could use it in the shower.
It's got that new tech that was on the Handyman.
But it's got the new tech. It's got a new interchangeable head so that you can pop off the skin-safe trimmer blade and pop on the Handyman razor head so that you can go super close shave. You can have super smooth balls.
Yeah. I mean, look, trees lose their leaves in the fall. It's time for you to shed some of your excess leaf weight off of your tree. So
I've used this a couple times now, and I'm so sorry you're learning so much about me today. But I've used it dry, and I finally sacked up, and used it in the shower just because I've been sort of weird. It totally works great. Again, I didn't use it like standing under the running water. It's still, I don't know about that, but in the shower when you're all wet, works great. And I actually found that the shaving head seems to work even better or faster when you're damp.
You're a little moist.
Yeah. So that's all we're going to talk about, my balls. But the thing is designed wonderfully. It's very cool. And it is built for a person traveling or, to put it in your dop kit. You got a cool little,
Yeah, I know. Look at that. Remember you had to buy accessories like that separately back in the day, but
No, and the accessories are quality. It's not flimsy. This is actually I'm going to use this type thing. You're not going to go buy another one anyway. You got your interchangeable head. You got a couple of different size combs that are adjustable for getting the perfect fade into the trunk.
Getting the fade. Your happy trail is a happy fade.
But if you're interested in checking this out or any of the other products that we love from Manscaped, please head over to manscaped.com. Use our code YoVG, all caps, for 20% off and free shipping worldwide. That's YoVG, all caps, at manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping. Your balls will thank you.
Yeah. So we know 2023 is one of the best years in video gaming.
Which is annoying.
That's annoying. Okay. I mean, is it just because the year's almost over and we know next year we'll in no way be able to compare or compete?
Okay, it's going to be a desert, but also it's annoying that there's how many games of the year have you run into this year where it's almost, and I've bought so many games that I'm anticipating and I haven't gotten to play most of them. Probably over half the games that I have bought. I've caught up.
I think there will come a moment where it's just kind of man, it's gonna because right now it's so fast paced,
right?
That when it inevitably hits next year, it's gonna be God, what happened to gaming? I honestly think it's almost kind of in a weird sort of doom posting way. I think that you're gonna lose some casual gamers some point probably next year or whenever, because people are gonna be so used to the rapid fire release of quality products, and then it's just that's just gonna stop. And I think people are just gonna who are not major gamers are just gonna kind of forget about gaming and oh yeah, and they're just gonna move on to something else.
Economics moment, nerd moment. This is called the bullwhip effect. The reason that there were so many high quality games that came out this year is probably because of COVID.
Right.
Everything got pushed back, but that means that next year might be a literal desert because they don't have enough things to come. And so you might get this bullwhip effect where you're going to have like tons of stuff coming out one year and not a lot coming out the next year, and then tons of stuff coming out one year, and you're going to like,
well, yeah, and then it's just kind of like, well, if the stuff isn't maintaining the quality, like say what you will, but it's like okay, for example, this year, and I'm already derailing this hard, but it's like, we had at least 3 Marvel, maybe 4 Marvel movies come out this year, at least 3. And 2 of them are not performing to expectations at all. Like Guardians did pretty good. And it's kind of like, yeah, well, there used to be a sort of like rapid fire release of like pretty good Marvel movies. Now
like
everyone
once a year you'd get something good.
And now you've kind of gotten this thing where like most people kind of feel like most of them are just okay. I still wouldn't say they're like bad, because I don't know if people remember how bad comic book movies were in the 90s, like Shaquille O'Neal starring in Steel for DC kind of thing.
How dare you? It was
So
a beautiful movie.
So in a sense, it's like the movies aren't necessarily bad, but like, that rapid fire release of like, banger after banger kind of, halting, if you will, kind of led to people kind of going like, I'm going to go watch something else.
There's also fatigue, and there's also they oversaturated. They made so many shows and other properties that had to like link in. So now you couldn't just like have seen the last movie that came out last year and vaguely remember it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that could go into that in particular, and I know a lot of people like to throw fatigue around, but I'm also kind of like, I don't think people. I think there's millions of people who don't pay attention one way or the other over if they're even watching a comic book movie or not. To them, it's just kind of like, was I entertained? Like they're just kind of like, does that look good? Does that look fun? Does that look like something?
Okay, I agree with what you're saying in principle. Of like, I don't think people are really paying attention. It's the reason why I argued that you could just cut it off. You don't have to like can't continue with 616. You could just pick a random story.
You
and start over.
absolutely could. I mean, people were down with the fact that Avengers was like, hey, the collection,
Yeah.
Well, they're also, I mean, they're happy with the fact that it did connect, but I think they're also, there's lots of people who are kind of like, I'm one of the people like when Endgame or Infinity War, either one, when they came out, I hadn't seen all the Marvel movies, movies. I didn't. I still haven't. I won't.
I do think fatigue is a thing. I don't think it necessarily means that, now any good movie comes out, it's not going to get popular. Good movies will always do well no matter what genre, even a fatigue genre. Look at Westerns. Westerns were the biggest thing for like a decade. They got made and made and made and made more than a decade. Everything has a lifespan. And Marvel movies, comic book movies in general, but Marvel movies specifically have been going for like 11 or 12 years. Going strong, dominating. The fact of the matter is like whether people acknowledge it consciously or not, you begin to turn off. You begin to stop caring.
Now, I don't want to like paint that as like that's going to happen to the gaming industry, because gaming is like it's more varied. There's a lot of genres. There's a lot of things.
It is also gaming is a behemoth compared to movies are small time compared to gaming. Gaming is the biggest entertainment industry now by like a long shot.
Especially if you include mobile in that.
Yeah, definitely if you include mobile. But if you, I don't think people are going to get like a burnout with gaming. I do think genres have.
Well, I think there's still a lot of people that people don't account for. Like people listening to this podcast, they may, you're a gamer if you're listening to our podcast, but like there's a lot of people in the world who just very casually play video games.
Oh yeah.
And
absolutely.
They'll kind of like, if something catches their eye or something like their entire world in gaming is strictly word of mouth.
Right. Yeah. It's like,
and if word of mouth is like, like saying like, oh, gaming sucks now, just they don't hear about gaming. So what I'm saying is we get to a point where not a ton of video games are coming out like this. Well, there's always going to be video games coming out, but I mean like quality games that people are talking about, right? we get to a point where they're just kind of like, yeah, there's a lot of just like, yeah, okay games, or just kind of like a drought, right?
You're not going to
They're
get the
just not going to
zeitgeist.
right. So
Yeah.
there's going to be millions and millions and millions of gamers who they don't buy any new games because they just don't hear about anything, because they're not checking the internet for it. And like who shops at retail anymore, right? Like they just don't have a reason to turn on their system or whatever. So they're just out of sight. It'll just become out of sight, out of mind.
Right, and I do think, like, obviously the vast majority of people that consume games are casual.
Mhm.
I would argue that I'm the upper limits of casual. Like I'm not
I mean,
by
all the proof you need is looking at what is the highest money earning, at least from the NPD. What are the highest money earners for the year to date? And the top of that list is Hogwarts Legacy, which is a
right,
major
yeah,
IP. And it's still Madden, it's still FIFA, it's still it is still the same old things that have been dominating the top 10 for decades.
yeah, because you get off work and you want to just turn your brain off
Right.
and sit down and enjoy. Um, yeah, and I argue that's why Nintendo is still as dominant as it is. It doesn't burn out its biggest
Hmm.
franchises, and
And
it's got
and
the most
and
notable.
and Nintendo is very stress free with this. Like, you go buy a Mario game, you're buying a Mario game. You're just getting a
Yeah,
good time. You don't have to think about, do I need to know anything? Do I have to like learn any weird control scheme? No, it's Mario.
you get into. I was talking about Alan Wake 2 with you guys the other day, and I realized, like, oh, I remember Alan. I loved Alan Wake 1, but it turns out there's a whole other game that feeds into the franchise, and so there's
Yeah,
stuff.
control.
Yeah, there's stuff in the, like, I had no idea. I had no idea that control was involved at all. And part of me was annoyed because I was like, do I got to go play that game to understand or enjoy all the reference? Because Alan Wake is so not in a bad way, but it is up its own ass. Like, it's all about like artists' woes and stuff. Like, it
Hmm.
is very insular and self-referential, and so part of me was like, there was a mild annoyance where I was like, damn it, do I gotta go find this game, play this game and stuff? And like, people liked Control a lot, but like, it's still there is something to be said about the casual. It's why COD does as well as it is. It's actually why COD isn't as enjoyable anymore, is because there's so much content out there about all these tips and tricks that we're like, being a casual COD player is not all the time, but can be miserable.
But it still makes some of the most money in the game industry is still COD.
Yeah, absolutely. But my point there is, like, people are starting to get burnt out on the way COD has been played. Like, the way COD is getting played. It's the reason why there's such a big push for a casual and a ranked version to try and get
Hmm.
the tryhards and
Yeah, and I go back
stuff
and
like
forth on it, but it's just kind of like,
right. And like, it's not like COD's gonna die. I'm not saying that. I'm just
mhm.
saying, like, I think there is like a push generally for games to be a little bit more accessible to the 9 to 5 crowd.
Yeah.
Where it's like, a lot of games, I think a lot of the game industry is built on the idea that a lot of the people consuming games never grew up. When you're that 10 to 20 years old, you have so much free time to sink into something, whereas, and you could do it with multiple different games. Whereas, like, you get into the, even up till say 25, you have more free time if you're going to college and stuff like that, and you haven't started working yet. But like, after 25 and you're working all the time, like, I think the level of commitment that people are willing to give to a game drops pretty significantly. And I don't think the game industry is built around that. Mobile gaming definitely is. Mobile gaming's built around that. You got 5 minutes, I'm going to try and milk you for $1.
Yeah.
But yeah, arcades were built beautifully on this idea. But
Right.
I do think that has shifted. And I know that our topic is sort of connected to, and this is a long entry or intro to what we're going to talk about. But like, that bullwhip effect, where this year was like just quality game after quality zeitgeist game. Like, no one thought that Baldur's Gate 3 was going to become the big hit that it was, but it
Yeah,
is now a part of the culture.
that
TM.
is definitely a game that was like, I don't think people saw it doing as well as it did.
Right.
Maybe early accessors, but like even still, like it still kind of felt like, wow, this was whoa, this is really good. Liza P was a very
Right.
big kind of like, I mean, we knew about it, but it was like, okay, this is really good. Oh my God. Alan Wake 2, I think, is going to sneak up on a lot of people as well. Especially with the reviews it's been getting, and people are like, oh my God, this is really good. And it's like, look, there's a big Remedy fan club, but like, there's going to be a lot of people, people like me probably who are like, I never played a Remedy game in my life. And they're like, wow, apparently this thing is really good.
You didn't play Alan Wake 1?
Me? God, no.
For some reason, I thought you did. You didn't play it at all?
No,
Oh, man.
no, I've never touched Alan Wake 1.
I really like Alan Wake 1 because it's got like a Twin Peaks.
Yeah, that's my takeaway. What's Alan Wake? It's like a big jerk off to Twin Peaks.
It's not. I mean, it is, but it's also like it's got an unreliable narrator. It's got, it's, I don't know. I think also if you went to school for writing or you are actively a writer.
Here's my hot take is that if Alan Wake 2, even with all its good, with its critical, praise, word of mouth, if it somehow still doesn't become a success financially, I gotta tell you, here's the reason Alan Wake still is not a financial success. It's the name.
Really?
The name to me, I think, doesn't inspire anything. It doesn't sound cool. It doesn't sound mysterious. What you playing? Alan Wake. What's that? It's about a guy. I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about this from an extremely casual dude bro perspective. Where I'm like, if this doesn't succeed at this point, if for all that it's doing, if it somehow still doesn't succeed, it's the damn name.
The funny thing is that Resident Evil would actually be kind of a better name for what Alan Wake actually is.
Right.
Than Resident Evil is for Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Biohazard's a great name for Resident Evil.
It doesn't really tell you anything about the game. And you're like, well, it's about Alan Wake. And I'm like, sure, if you sit down and play through it, but it's like, when you think about like big selling games or whatever, Call of Duty, Halo is mysterious, right? Kind of either falls in that mysterious or cool, like The Last of Us. Whoa, what's that mean? Kind of thing. Ghost of Tsushima, you get what I'm saying? Like there's this like people think that like nobody's that superficial. Yes, they are.
Oh no, they are. But I think Alan Wake is actually intriguing. I mean,
like their previous name game was better because the name sounded cool. Max Payne.
Well, I mean, that was a very 90s name.
Max Payne.
Alan Wake is pretty good though. It's a pretty good. It's a solid title.
It sounds like your freaking tax consultant.
It's an author's name. It's such a good author.
No, I know, but like if for some reason it can't find its target,
you're blaming the name.
I'm blaming the name. I'm going with the name on this one because I'm like, what else could it? Are
you trying to get a job at a studio? What's
no? I'm just saying, like, what else could possibly what could possibly stop this game? If this game somehow doesn't find an audience, like what possible reason could there be? And I'm like, well, the only thing I can think of at this point is like it's got to be the name.
No, you know what it is. If it doesn't reach an audience, I think it's entirely because its story is somewhat inaccessible. It is a slow burn story,
right?
Like, and it is.
But I don't even. That's people playing the game for 5 minutes. Even I'm talking about people like just. You got to get to the point where people buy the game to play the game to know that it's a slow burn.
Yeah, I mean, truly, if Alan Wake is not if Alan Wake 2 is not a success, didn't people call Indigo Prophecy a success?
No, it was a failure. It was
thank God,
huge flop.
Thank God.
Huge flop.
I remember when I got that out of a bargain bin, it was like now the iconic, like it had like a stickers of the iconic game is a greatest hit or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, okay. I might be mixing it up with another basically like playable movie, but I believe Indigo Prophecy was the one that had had the $1 million was it sweepstakes?
For figuring out
I don't know if it was Indigo Prophecy or if it was a different game. No, it was Advent Rising. I'm thinking of.
Oh, okay.
I know they're pretty kind of somewhat similar. They kind of like yeah, kind of I guess clash in my mind. Yeah, that's still
But
yeah.
that goes to your argument
Also a
where
flop.
Indigo
Also
Prophecy,
flop.
good title.
Well,
The
yeah,
Indigo Prophecy.
but like you look at the game and it's kind of like I mean it didn't blow up because there's not a ton more to it, but like yeah, I'm thinking of Advent Rising was one that was like they were putting all their eggs in a basket for hoping that was going to be something and it wasn't, and then they literally had to cancel their contest for $1 million um in the game.
That's a bummer. That you could say they were all laid off, which
Hmm.
topical because with all the games that are coming out, you might be surprised with all the quality games. You might be surprised that like a lot of companies are laying people off, but one of the companies that laid a bunch of people off is Bungie. And Bungie
Bungie,
should be doing pretty friggin' well right now
yeah, so Bungie was bought by Sony about a year ago,
for
and
like
then they
$1 billion or something. Like,
a few billion.
yeah, it was,
It was not cheap. But yeah, so Bungie laid off, as we found out, it was as we've come to learn, about approximately 8% of its staff, and this just got weirder and weirder. And basically, as I've come to understand, from what I understand, why Bungie, why now, what Bungie did this on the 30th of October, so that the people who were laid off only had a single day left on their health care.
right.
So basically, it's like when you get fired or when you get laid off, your health runs to the end of that month. So they do it on the second to last day of the month. No one's going to sit there and run out and get a bunch of dental work done or do anything they got to do for their health. Is it a scummy thing? Absolutely, of course it is.
It's the reason why California did its 60-day thing.
Yeah, right. And another big thing was, um, they were saying it was because it failed to meet its sales projections, and they're basically down 45% money wise year over year. So they're just basically cutting their losses here. But then it gets weird though, because the people they are cutting were really high up, like kind of like these are individual talent they're letting go. They let go the composer. They let go like lead artists, writers. Like
Right.
why are we letting go like the people who have the most individualistic talent, the composer, for God's sake? That to me was super weird. And I think you were saying that, and I remember this was also brought up. It has to do with stock options.
It has to do with the stock options. It also, I mean, from the PR spin, they could try to say that, like, oh, getting rid of them let us keep 8 other people, depending on how much they're
Right.
paid. Probably not 8, maybe 2.
Because here's the thing:
Uh,
when you hear about companies like Activision and whoever laying off 10% of their workforce, it's almost always QA. It's almost always like people like the whole
right.
departments that are like somewhat like out, like this can be contracted out. This is kind of like lower end or whatever,
Yeah,
like
no one that
redundant.
is integral to the next thing coming.
Yeah, usually there's quote unquote people whose job are safe because they're so important to the team, to the company. But
Like,
Bungie's
say,
kind
the
of
composer of all their games.
yeah. So Bungie is like the opposite, where it's like why are they getting rid of some of their best people? And the stock option thing came up, and then it's like okay, so
Yeah, basically, they're getting rid of a bunch of these people that, because of their position, they were granted a bunch of stock options in Sony when they got purchased, and now they're getting rid of them just before that would mature, so they don't actually have to pay them those stock options,
hmm
is my understanding. Um, the other thing that there's rumors, this isn't, I have no confirmed uh, source or anything for this. This is not like, this is just rumors. Is that like they seem to get rid of people that weren't gelling with the culture. I don't know if that's how true that is, because like they got rid of people that were clearly integral to like Marathon going forward and stuff like that. That just seemed like they didn't, I don't know, toe the line culturally for Bungie. Like they weren't they weren't really rah about Bungie, like it was a 9 to 5 to them, not their whole lives or something. And that does happen in layoffs, like especially in tech companies, which you would hope the development, wouldn't be run like a tech company, but everything's run like a tech company now because they've been
Right.
so successful. But like if you're not like in the cult, especially if you're in middle or upper management, like they really want you to be like part of the cult of Bungie or the cult of whoever. And again, that's just like speculation. There's no hard evidence of that. It's just sort of from looking at what people have said about getting laid off and has been laid off. It seems like they got rid of the people that weren't like super gung ho, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to give you a sobering number. We still got 2 months left of the year. In the video game industry this year, 6,400 employees have been laid off.
Well, how many people are employed in the game industry?
Well, of course, right? But just think about that number. Like there was 6,400, and Bungie had hirings on their website back in August.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of is like a pretty sudden out of nowhere kind of thing where they just said, it's time to get rid of some people.
And apparently it has nothing to do with Sony. So like,
yeah, so because
Sony's kind of looking.
Yeah, well, Bungie was kind of allowed to operate autonomously as part of the deal of the buyout.
Right.
So, and I know some people have argued that, tried to argue that, like, of course Sony knew about this. Like, how could they not? I'm like, here's how the conversation probably went. We're gonna, hey, we're not hitting the numbers we were hoping to, so we're gonna lay off 8% of our workforce. And Sony, and they literally just casually send that in one single email or phone call to someone at Sony, and Sony goes, "Cool,
yeah,
I'm not gonna stop you." Like,
so Sony is kind of in an interesting position because they're sort of facing a cliff, is my understanding this year. Like, possibly one of the reasons Jim Ryan is getting out is like they don't have a whole lot coming, and so they're going to have a hard year.
I mean, it's here's the thing. I don't want to be like they've got to have stuff coming, but like don't you think it's kind of weird that Sony hasn't talked about anything now that Spider-Man 2 is done and out and finished? Like, we know there's a Wolverine game, we know there's technically a Death Stranding 2 happening. But like, don't you think it's kind of weird that they haven't talked about either of those games in a while and they have nothing to say about anything else? Naughty Dog's apparently like they've had to backburn the hell out of their multiplayer Last of Us game. Like, we know nothing else about what's going on.
They switched up they're doing a remake of Last of Us 2 rather than Last of Us 3 to come out, probably to garner
there's like a
guaranteed
Last of Us
income.
2 remaster happening,
Yeah.
even though there already was like an upgrade patch for PS5 for Last of Us 2 already.
Yeah.
So why do we need a remaster so we can have a remake like 2 years after that? Like,
do you remember those 2 years? Must have been like what, 2016, 2017 maybe? E3 where no, I think it was later than that. Where all Sony's booth, literally it was just the same Spider-Man booth 2 years in a row.
yeah,
And it was like all Spider-Man, and there was
like
like
17,
one little
18 or something like that. Yeah,
it was like that, and like there was like one section of Death Stranding, but otherwise it was all Spider-Man stuff, and they had a huge plot in the E3 like main hall. It feels a little bit like that again, where we're just like maybe what's granted, yeah, Sony is not the reason that Bungie did layoffs, but Sony might be doing some layoffs.
And there was rumors and rumblings that Sony was going to start like contracting its IPs out to third parties to do updates to franchises for them, such as Sega possibly making a new Wipeout game for them.
Right on. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Great for Sega, great for Wipeout, but it's also kind of like frustrating because like, God damn it, Nintendo, why didn't you have them do a new F-Zero already? But like that, and that's that,
don't care.
and the thing is, that's just complete rumor. That's complete rumor. Like, so I don't want to talk about like the viability of it because it's probably, who knows, God knows, we'll know in a couple of years. But it's like, if that were to be a route that Sony was going to go, it would be interesting because it's like, you have to contract Sega to make a Wipeout game because you fired and shut down the Wipeout studio that you owned for like 20 years. What, like,
Right.
but here's the thing: maybe it's cheaper this way.
Almost definitely it's cheaper this way. The other thing is I bet you Sony's going to be moving a lot of its operations again now that, you know, uh, it seems like Sony Japan is taking a, more hands-on approach to Sony Entertainment. And they might be moving operations out of California for instance. So you might see stuff happening
It's
there.
hard to say because like they've been so successful. So it's kind of like
Right.
it really depends on what does, because
Well, they
people
wouldn't be
think
moving anywhere else in the US.
people think, yeah, it's true. People think that like Sony is PlayStation, PlayStation is Sony, and it's like no,
Mhm.
there's actually a much larger corporation still behind the PlayStation part of it.
That makes like all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, not well, and they're not doing well, so they've kind of been letting PlayStation kind of like do its thing. But like even all good things must come to an end eventually. But here's the thing, like and here as someone who's just sort of an I guess enthusiast would be probably the most apt description of me. How the fuck are we living in an age where games are harder to make, take longer to make, require more hours and manpower, and all I'm hearing about is you laying people off? How do we live? And on top of that, the companies doing better are laying people off.
Mm.
How do we live in how did we get to the point where Epic Games of all peoples has to start laying people off? You're Epic.
Yeah.
I know Fortnite's getting long in the tooth, but like you
I
make so much money. You make so much money. It's not even that like, and people are saying like, well, they're doing this because of shareholder reasons. Because it's like we basically they finally got pushed to the edge of the cliff, and now they're just going over the cliff, where it's like they're jumping off the cliff, which is basically like we have to make more money than last year. We've chased the tail of this dragon so far of like every year and quarter has to be better than the last, has to be better than the last, has to be better than the last, has to be better than the last. Like we have nowhere else to go. What do we do? I just start firing people so we don't have to pay them as much, so we have more money to be more profitable.
Yeah,
And
right.
it's like, well, what
Labor
happens after?
costs.
Right. So it's like, what happens after that? You fall. You've jumped off the cliff because the minute you're a profitable company and you said we need to get rid of our workforce that got you to the point of the edge of the cliff, now you've leapt, because now it's like I have to make that last extra bit of year over year better. No, it's better now. How is it better? It's better because I don't have to pay the developers anymore. And okay, now it's better. Now guess what happens next quarter, next year? You're going to massively fall because you will have no production. Like you won't have anything in the pipeline.
I think that would be true if they were getting rid of a more significant portion.
That's probably the more, yeah, and that's probably the more like
The way that it would be argued for, like in a business school setting, is that you're just cutting back, branches before winter.
trimming the fat, right? Because
Yeah, you're
again,
just,
even with Bungie, we're talking 8% of their staff, which leaves 92% still there.
and you're also going to see with all the mergers and acquisitions and stuff that's happened, say by like Microsoft, you're going to see more layoffs coming just for redundancy. They're going to be
Right.
getting rid of redundant positions. They're going to be, you know, layoffs aren't actually necessarily a bad thing or a bad sign, depending on how
Right. It
big
depends
they
on
are.
who. Well,
It
to me,
sucks for the devs.
right. Well, who's getting laid off? Why are they getting laid off? Right.
Right.
And when you're talking about like your lead designers, your lead artists, your lead composers are just getting gutted, it's like how the hell are you? How are you going to make a product? How does this happen? Like, and here's the thing: I've seen a sort of like whiplash, like the cheerleaders for Nintendo come out and talk about how they have a 98.9 or something retention rate. And I'm like, yeah, because Japan has a law about firing. Like it is extremely difficult to fire someone. You have to actively prove, like in a court of law, that they were sabotaging your company to get rid of them, which is why you get demoted to hell until like they basically quit. That's, you know, granted, I don't want to sit there and say that's like the way it is for everyone. It's like, no, Nintendo still has a good employee retention rate because people don't leave their company. Because what you do see happening a lot in Japan is people leave, they get a better job, they get poached.
Right.
And Japan's always terrified of this in the 80s, and it finally felt like it started happening more often, actually, more recently than when they were so afraid of it in the 80s. But like I've seen this thing where it's like, oh, look at how good they are. I'm like, well, there is and isn't something to be said there, where I feel kind of like that. Here's my big fear, and it's fear mongering here. The whole like Nintendo will, Nintendo's execs will take pay cuts, to keep their employees. That was then. This is now that was when they had a game developer running the company, not an accountant.
Yeah, Nintendo doesn't do that. Iwata did that.
Yeah, like you had someone, when you had a developer running your company, the developer running the company didn't want to ever let go of developers. We have an accountant running the company now. I think the next 5 to 10 years for Nintendo are going to be a lot more interesting. You heard it here first.
I do think that, not to be too doom and gloom, I want to balance it out a little bit where it's like, could be totally wrong. Next year could be fine. We are technically still in a massive labor shortage, oddly enough, not in California. California is a parity / there's more people than jobs available, especially in Southern California, entertainment industry in particular. But what I do think that means is that a lot of those devs are going to get snapped up, especially, devs from like Bungie and stuff like that.
Very anecdotal, but I read a thing, for a comment. I don't even remember who or where, but it was basically about how someone was going to school for tech and they wanted to get into the game industry. And they said, I looked at how volatile, like the game industry was. And he went into, I think you said, I went into like software programming for like, a software for that businesses use, right?
Yeah.
Like technical stuff like that. Just
B2B.
ITT tech shit, whatever. And he says like, I just switched from gaming to like software, business software. And he said it was the best decision I ever made because I might be misremembering where exactly, but he pivoted to another brand, another type of technology because it was way more stable.
Yeah,
it was way more stable. Like, I have job security and I didn't have to move constantly and I didn't have to worry about like every year, making a profit or whatever kind of thing. So it's just kind of like,
yeah, that's the other thing they don't really talk about is that because game development, sort of like film production or any entertainment industry, it's a dreams industry. And so they know you want that job. So they'll, the competition to get any of those jobs is really fierce, which keeps wages down, which means that they can sort of abuse the system, which is probably why you need unions.
Right? Exactly.
Like I don't think unions are a one size fits all solution to everything, but
this is something that like Max and I have talked about plenty of times. Even we're talking about like Disneyland, where they're like, how do they get people to work Disneyland for minimum wage? Because they know people want to work there.
Yeah.
They know people love your brand. It's the same thing in gaming. Like you said, they exploit you. They exploit your dreams so that they can exploit you as a human in your talents and your workability. Nobody sits there and says, what do you want to be when you grow up? An elevator repairman.
Which is too bad because they make bank.
Because they make great money. They do. Elevator maintenance repair people make great money. But when you're thinking like, what do you want to be like? When you're thinking, I want to be an engineer. I want to like fix things. I want to like, you want to build and I'm playing all my Legos and I'm putting it all together and I made this utopia, of Legos. Nobody sits there and be like, I want to fix the elevators. But you know what? That guy fixing the elevators, he might actually have a more stable income and job than anyone else.
Good quality of life, interesting work. A little bit dangerous, but not bad.
Well, that's kind of my point, though. It's kind of like, like people are like, nobody sits there and goes like, I want to make updates, on the back end to Excel. No, someone wants to make the
Oh.
next. Someone wants to make the next Mario Brothers.
You know, one of the worst things about any creative industry or like working in any creative industry is that everybody knows it's hard, but everybody thinks they can do it.
Mm,
And that means that there's always competition. And even if you're totally honest and trying to get the job, there's somebody lying about what they can do to compete with you.
yeah.
And this is something that like it is the worst thing about any of these industries, and I'm sure it's true in game development. I'm sure there's like devs that we know that have some horror story of like, I don't know how this guy got the job because they were do nothings, you know. Um but that happens.
Everyone's like, just a tragic NFL star in the main, like the dad who always fancied himself. I could be a great NFL player or
Right,
whatever.
yeah.
Like the
Couch
uncle from
quarterbacks.
couch quarterbacks, like the uncle from Napoleon Dynamite or whatever.
It's incredible. In terms of like Bungie doing layoffs and the weird layoffs that they did, I do think more weird stuff is going to come out about that because it doesn't seem like a standard reduction in force, as the PR speak likes to say it.
Hmm.
It seems more targeted than that, which I think is going
I
to
think,
cause
yeah.
problems.
Now this it's prediction, but I think you're saying it's going to get personal. You're like personal stories and anecdotes are going to start coming out.
Yeah,
Possibly.
I think that stuff's gonna come out, and I think if it really is that, if it really is targeted, I think you're gonna see a lawsuit. If that is true. If it's
Hmm.
not actually targeted, fine. But like targeted layoffs is just
Here, my theory
firing.
is that this was all related to health and stock options, and it was legal what they did, so they can't sue.
Mhm.
But it was just pure scum.
Yeah.
It was legal
Dick
corporate
move.
scummery, like just complete dick move. That's what I think might be the answer here.
I hope
Which
not. You know, the thing is like Bungie is one of those companies that you just it made the game that you loved when you were a kid, and so you want to hope that they're better. I think it's what happens to so many people who love Nintendo.
hmm,
Is like I loved Halo and Halo 2 when I was a kid, and so part of me is like, "Oh yeah, Bungie, they do things right." But they're still a company. Like they're still going to do shady things. They're still a
that's
corporation.
just the weird thing about
Yeah.
like games, branding and franchises you love, and it's kind of like kind of one of two things usually happens where it's like you find like, oh, I love this thing. What happened? Like the person who made it like just gets out of the game industry. They either get promoted out of game development or they just leave the industry altogether, or something happens where there's like, yeah, they directed the first and second or maybe the first three, but then they kind of were gone. Like the talent that made the game you loved got promoted out or just quit out or something else like that. And so it's like you're falling in love with a brand logo. You're not falling in love with like a production necessarily. It's like, okay, I've been watching a
Right.
lot of horror movies. Okay.
Right on.
And I've been watching, Nadia's kind of trying to like, get me to basically like expand my horizons. And she's like, let's watch the, like one of the themes we decided this year was, and I was kind of like going, I kind of went for it. I was like, the idea was, I haven't really watched any slashers. So I'm like, let me watch like the
Yes.
first of each slasher kind of like franchise. Right. And if we haven't really watched any sequels really, but it's like, I know they get, for the most part, most of them get worse before they
Mm,
even get better. Like, you got Friday, like I haven't watched it, but it's like you get to Friday, you start with Friday the 13th, and eventually it's going to lead to Jason X. So,
which is unequivocally the best one in the entire series.
oh, shut up.
Jason X is a masterpiece of
Oh,
wanton destruction
hmm.
and
So, but here's the thing: it's like, well, some people, some people fall in love with the name, right? Like Saw. Saw's a good example, right? There's Saw 10 or something came out this year. I don't know if anyone saw it. I didn't. But it's like that means there's 10 Saw movies. I
yeah.
mean, I remember back in the mid 2000s, there were commercials on TV that says it's Halloween. That means it's time to see Saw.
Yeah,
Because it was like Saw 5 or 6 or something. So it
the
was kind of like, it's not the same director and writer and creator like in making all 10 of those movies. I mean, maybe some franchises probably is like that, but it's like Why are their sequels so bad? Because the people who made that first one what it is weren't there for every step of the way. Like, do you think Tremors 6 holds up to Tremors 1? No. Like, why? Because it's not the same people. But for video games, they've done a very good job of basically hiding the fact of like who's the talent behind these games. Japan was absolutely terrified of anyone knowing who made any video game. And that culminated with Kojima, who pushed back against that narrative during his time at the company hard, and eventually it came to a boiling point, and they got rid of him. So, yeah, like most of these game companies do not want you to. When you sit there and I'm like, okay, like because we've talked about it so much, I ask you, Andrew, who created Resident Evil?
Oh, I don't know about the first one
It's
actually.
Shinji Mikami.
Shinji Mikami. I thought he did 2 though.
He was producer. He was director, creator of 1, producer of 2. Kamiya did 2.
No shit. I did not know that.
So people but Capcom's done a fantastic job of making sure you don't know who's actually the creator and an original director of Resident Evil.
Well, so that's actually kind of funny because the only reason I know that Shinji Mikami did like 4, for instance, is because I liked 4 so much, so I like dug into it.
Yeah, and he had to come back and do 4 because there were like 3 other directors who all failed at getting it off the ground, and he had to basically, all right, let me go do this. So it's great, right? So it's like they've done this fantastic job of like nobody remembers who directed like RE6, and I mean that guy basically like too many cooks in the kitchen there. But it's just like, or even 7 for that matter. It's like
rough time, or Village.
Village, really, and even when the games are good, they don't want you to know who did this.
You know, interesting aside is that Kamiya and Mikami are going to do like a panel.
Yeah, they're having a news conference
I wonder
this month in Japan. I'm like,
I wonder
if
anything cool.
You know what? I'm like, it was too coincidental. Because
they're going to announce something, right?
Kamiya had a YouTube video, and he said he made the decision a couple months ago that he was going to leave Platinum. Like it was only announced, but it was like he had made the decision months ago. So I'm like, something's up. Those two being in such those two being so closely like linked in their respective fields and working together, and suddenly they're both quitting their companies. I'm like, something's up.
Also, I should just admit it, since it's no one that listens to us is going to care. I was going to say Kamiya did number 1.
He did Devil May Cry 1.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kamiya did a bunch of games that I think anybody would recognize.
Yeah. Yes,
I mean, he's kind of an innovator just in general of like action games specifically. But
yeah.
I do think it is interesting because we've had whole episodes where we've talked about Auteurs. And one of the thing about Auteurs, and something we said in that episode, is like there's no true Auteurs other than, you know, maybe Kojima, because part of being an auteur is that your brand is you. Like the movie gets sold, the game gets sold.
If you want to get really down and dirty with it, there's the Auteurs.
Sid Meier's.
The Auteurs are people who usually are not that successful. Suda 5-1 is a big one. No More Heroes. Swery. I know people would be remiss if I didn't mention him, but he's like, we're talking very, very niche, right?
Right.
Swery's another one. Yoko Taro's a big one, or big now, but he was making projects that nobody played beforehand for Automata, right? So it's kind of like when you want to talk about our tours, most of them aren't successful.
Which is also true about movies. People don't realize that it wasn't until like the 70s, and even then it wasn't truly until the 2000s.
Yeah.
But like we didn't necessarily.
And then every so often, one of these Auteurs will break into mainstream. Something will just really catch on with the main public.
Mm-hmm.
And the weird thing about that is, and I noticed it, and I kind of noticed that because I watched The Exorcist for his 50th anniversary. That director, I think he did The French Connection.
Friedkin. Isn't it William Friedkin?
William Friedkin. And then he did Exorcist. None of his movies ever really got to that height of financial success after Exorcist.
No, but he's a genius, and
which is like
the best interview you'll ever watch.
Well, this is kind of my point where I'm like, okay, he's an auteur, right?
Mhm.
He's a great director, but he's not always gonna what he does is not necessarily mainstream. It's just one, couple of the things he did find a mainstream audience, but like he's not like reliable. He's not gonna Marvel, Kevin Feige, all his movies are gonna be like of this similar brand and quality and
So that's
theme and da 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 da.
Friedkin's not an auteur. Friedkin's a craftsman's director, like Billy Wilder and stuff like that. Like, yeah, he has style that pops up, but like an auteur, the easiest example, of course, is like Tarantino, where like every single frame is made to tell you this is my movie.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
He has like Friedkin made really good quality movies, but like you didn't necessarily know it was a Friedkin movie the moment you started watching it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The stamp, like the director's stamp, like the creator's stamp, was not on every frame.
You're watching a Kubrick movie. It has a consistent style with his other movies. It has usually a consistent narrative with a lot of the movies that he's exploring.
And usually only about a third of it's actually any good.
I mean, hey, look, I started some fights.
I can hear the hesitancy there. Where you're just like, hey, look, you're right, but don't go saying it out loud. I'm like,
look, the first like 45 minutes of a Kubrick film is always some of the best, most memorable stuff you're ever going to watch. But I do feel like there's a good chunk of his films where you get like, I don't know, maybe it's fatigue. But you just don't remember a lot of the middles, except for Doctor Strangelove, because Doctor Strangelove is it's perfect from beginning to end. It is actually genuinely,
look, man, it's
just
like
great.
The biggest example, everyone knows Full Metal Jacket. Like training camp is super memorable.
Right.
After that, rest of the movie, what happens? I don't know.
What's the climax
of Full Metal Jacket? I have no idea.
I know it. I know it because one of our friends is like, it's one of his favorite movies. And when I said this, he then proceeded to quote every scene in order and was like, see, that proves it's amazing. I was like, no, it means that you loved it. And that's not the same thing. I love Kevin Smith. That doesn't mean that all of Kevin Smith's movies are fantastic.
Yeah, I can definitely quote you lots of movies that aren't really great. You know,
most of the movies that I love probably are not objectively great. But that's the cool thing about art. Don't fucking matter.
Especially Good, Bad, and the Ugly. That one's terrible.
You get the hell out of here. Would I argue that it's his best film? No. But The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a great film. Also, though, that's an auteur. You're watching one of his movies, Sergio, you know it's his movie. From the music to the way he does like whip zooms and I mean that is
and that's the thing where it's like some games have that. Again, there are again Swery, Yoko Taro, Kojima. Yes, Kojima.
He's the easiest one to point to. Yeah,
Kojima's the easiest and most well known and most successful, I think, of the auteur. So you know a Kojima game when you're playing it.
Do you know a Mikami game when you're playing it? And I love Mikami's games. I think
you know a Kamiya game more than you know a Mikami game.
Right, that's my point. Mikami he's a craftsman. He can come in and make something good out of a pile of shit.
Right.
William Friedkin was a craftsman. A lot of directors that weren't auteurs, because right now it's really popular to be an auteur, but like there used to be the craftsman director, that came in and like later on, decades later in some cases, people went, oh, they had like a singular style and they were auteurs. But at the time, they were just the guys that were hired because they could do the thing and they could do it competently and they did it with style. And yeah, they hid real art in their films, but like Billy Wilder would write a film in a weekend all the time. He was literally cranking out movies all the time. He didn't invent, but sort of the American noir. He didn't invent it, but he did so much of it that he would just crank it out. And then like the next week he'd crank out a insane wacky comedy,
Hell, that was RE4. Mikami said he just went home and just wrote it out in a weekend or something.
Right, he's
really
a
fast. He was just like, we needed to make this game and it was so behind budget and schedule and everything. I'm just like, whip
And
something up, to,
like a
make
lot of
it work.
people think it's an insult if you don't say someone's an auteur, and in my opinion, it's not. Like in my opinion, being a craftsman director or craftsman artist, an
Well,
artist that just steps in and like
that's the other thing. You can be an auteur and make crap. But
yeah,
people.
right. What's the guy that did Planet Nine or Plan from
Oh,
uh
Ed Wood.
Ed Wood? Right. Yeah, Ed Wood
No,
is an auteur.
honestly, Yoko Taro was Ed Wood of video gaming.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely
Maybe
say
not
that he
Ed
had
Wood,
really interesting ideas.
because Ed
Ed
Wood
Wood did
didn't.
not.
Right, but that's kind of unfair to Taro, because like Ed Wood didn't have actually great scripts or anything. Taro has great ideas. He's a terrible director, and he will tell you that himself.
Right.
So it's like, oh, he makes such great stories and has such like, I'm like, yeah, and he's absolutely awful at directing a project, and he's the first in line to tell you that.
Yeah, I don't think it's an insult at all to say someone's not an auteur, they're a craftsman. I mean, to have longevity in general, you got to be good at it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, anybody that's listening and wants to look up filmmaker interviews to
Well,
learn stuff,
here's a
William
good one.
Friedkin.
I want to say I think it's Kono, at Nintendo, who does Mario Kart. Like he
Yeah,
basically has been in charge of Mario Kart for like decades now. He used to work on like with Miyamoto on the mainstream Mario games, and then when Mario Kart took off, he kind of at one point became the head of the Mario Kart for Nintendo.
he was the Mario Kart guy.
Right. So you could say he's the workman or the workhorse, whatever, type of Nintendo, director or producer, if you will. Producer is more accurate. But it's like, what does he do? He produces Mario Kart and
Right, the
keeps
guy who
producing
did
Mario Kart.
Smash.
Sakurai.
Sakurai, yeah, he's not an auteur, but he's absolutely a craftsman.
Sakurai is a would be auteur. If you look at Kirby Superstar and you look at Kid Icarus Uprising, the 3DS game, like the projects that's not Smash Brothers, like if he wasn't so tied to that franchise, and keep in mind he intentionally ties himself to it. He might have been, he probably would have been on our tour, but he's too much of a perfectionist, and he can't stand the idea of someone directing a project that he created.
Oh, well, then maybe he is an auteur.
Oh, he is, but he's also I'll work myself to death kind of person. I mean, there's times where he came close to Jim Hensing himself.
Wow, that dark turn there.
I mean, he talks about it like he brags about it. Oh yeah, I had this serious flu, but instead of going to the hospital, I just hooked an IV to my bag and went to work. Just kept doing my job. And I'm like, that is not something you should be bragging about.
No family at home, huh? No, no joys outside of the job, apparently.
He has a cat, apparently. I don't know.
Well, his lost my gain.
That's way too, and that darkly is way too many gamers' personal feeling on anything with video games. It's just kind of like, this guy nearly died bringing you this game. Yeah, well, my gain. It's
Good job, ma'am. I'm not gonna do it, but I'm real happy you exist. To bring it full circle, because I feel like
I think that's the other thing too, is that like here's another problem. Is you've got some of these really good talent people like Sakurai. Sakurai's a good example. I'm sorry I'm shooting on you, Sakurai. I love your games, but goddamn.
Could you imagine if he got laid off?
Well, he quit. And then Iwata came back and like, I will give you money. I don't care anyways. So here's the thing. You get people like Sakurai who are very talented and very good at what they do, but they're workaholics. And execs almost kind of know this. I feel like there's an insidiousness to it, because they're like, what we need is not what we need more of is we need people who are, regardless of how much of a detriment to their personal and mental physical health this is, they will sit there and be a maverick, and they will see this project all the way through to the end. And you hear about that even from the Western devs. You hear about it from Naughty Dog all the time. where they're like,
Yeah.
if you work here, you're a rogue, you're a maverick. You make sure we get this shit done. We don't go home until it's finished.
You
And it's like,
bleed the naughty dogs. None of those nice dogs here.
right. And so you just get this whole industry wrapped around the idea that it's like the people who work hard get the money, and it's like that's not even really true. That's like a few people get it pretty good. When the only time people ever had it good, and even then they still work themselves like crazy, was when the 20-year-olds at id were making Wolfenstein 3D and Doom and the first Quake. That was when you had people who were young, ambitious, and it only required 10 people to make a video game, right? So
Right.
they all got Lamborghinis and Ferraris because of how successful their game was. But that only worked then, because you didn't need to literally have hundreds of people who were of all varying ages. You had 20-something-year-olds who were just, hey, this is my first real gig. I'm really good at programming. I'm going to burn the midnight oil, and then I'm going to make a couple $1,000,000 off of this.
And then it's all blowjobs and margaritas. Woo!
I mean, it kind of was for some people.
I mean, that's what Atari was. Everyone at
definitely-
Atari, that's all they wanted.
Look,
margaritas and jacuzzis.
honestly, the way Nolan Bushnell ran that company, at least when he did, was kind of, I almost admire it, because we talked about this on this podcast. If you go back far enough, Atari's history has people like when they were super successful, everyone was in the jacuzzi on lunch break.
Right.
Like everyone, the secretary, well, of course the secretaries, but anyone in that company was just kind of like, yeah, get your job done, and then let's just go party, or let's just go smoke weed, or let's jump in the jacuzzi. Like it didn't
time.
The people who were at lower positions, even to this day, will sit there and tell you, yeah, we had some crazy fun times at Atari, because honestly, that was the mentality they had. It was just kind of like, hey, we're successful, spread some what you don't have the I don't know what it is. I don't know where it came from. But the psychopaths took over, right? The businesses got bigger, and things had to the psychopaths had to basically run the business, because they needed the business to grow even bigger than what it already was. And what does that mean? That means you're going to be mean to people. That means you're going to lay off people. That means you just can't care. You can't care about everyone having a fair shake. Spread the wealth. F that. Like, I need a new yacht.
I an anecdote to end the episode. I worked for a guy who had a really a very successful reality show for his company one year. And so at the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year, he rented out the Lucky Strike on Hollywood Boulevard and threw a private party where
Lucky Strike's a bowling alley restaurant, for those who don't know.
Yeah, Lucky Strike is a big high-end bowling alley / bar and restaurant. And stuff. He rented out the whole Lucky Strike with all the bars, and there was a VIP area upstairs that he had rented out. And just threw the biggest, most ridiculous party that cost probably the budget of a single episode of the show. And I ran into him. I was just kind of like, this is a crazy party. He was like, but we're doing good right now, and everybody should be happy about that. I mean, he's wasted. And he wandered off and played drunk bowling. I don't know. There's not a lot of that happening anymore. Rap parties aren't that level of ridiculous anymore. And they used to be even more ridiculous. I think bean counters and tech bros have infected every single entertainment industry, I guess, maybe all industries now. And they're a lot of them might be psychopaths, man. I don't know.
This is the thing. What is the end game for these idiotic publishers? And I'm sorry, you're idiotic when
Misery.
when you get rid of your talent, and you're like, okay, well, what's your 5-year plan? Because the thing is you can get rid of QA. Look, QA is a hard job, and it definitely it's not like it doesn't require any skill. It absolutely does. But I'm saying when you get someone who's a programming genius, an artistic genius, a composing genius, and you decide I'm going to get rid of them to make some money, to bounce back from profits this year or whatever, right? How do you easily replace that? Like how do you fill that up? Because it's just this thing where we're like, what is your end goal here? Because if you get rid of all your talent, you've burned that bridge with them. Maybe you can under operate under the idea that like they'll come crawling back if I offer it again. And that does happen. That does happen in this game industry a lot, where they lay off and then they rehire the same person. They do that to get them to come back at a lower salary or something. But
I think that happens a lot. I also think that again, they're not laying off the majority. If they're laying off the majority of their company, is different than like an 8% reduction.
And again, I don't think the industry is going to crash next year.
No, I do think next year is going to be interesting, though.
What I do think is going to happen is I think in the next 5 to, let's say, 15 years, I think the trajectory of the industry right now is not healthy at all. Because I think more than just laying people off now, I think you're scaring people away. Because as the reality of what this game industry is comes into light more and more, I feel like it's almost insane to get into this three-ring circus of a game industry, the way it's being run and operated right now, where there's no job security, there's no there's no guarantees, there's no nothing, right? Like even people from the top talent to the bottom, can get let go at any time for any reason, which usually involves like, I need my shares to be better this year.
Look, I'll end it on a bold prediction. I think within the next 5 years, you're going to see the first unionization for game devs.
For devs, not for, because there is some small rumblings going on, like with Raven and with Sega, but these are PR or QA or whatever. These are not people who get to make directorial decisions of a game.
I think in the next 5 years, you're gonna see a unionization effort, like a true one, with game devs. And I think you're gonna see a strike.
I don't know if they have any other choice. Like the way things are going, like now, like frankly, I think this has gone way too far.
Right.
I think the quality of life for anyone in general game development has gotten so miserable at this point. Like this should have already happened, personally. And thank God we had a good year like 2023, because when that strike happens, I'll finally
rough.
but you know what? I'm gonna have a great backlog.
That's true. That Steam library is gonna get used.
That backlog is finally gonna get filled. So
on that note, we have patrons to thank. If you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Dude of the week was Dwyas. Thank you, Dwyas. And our producers for this episode are Mutton Chops Johnson, Scroonami, Karoy35, Hyperviper89, and ZZ. Thank you, dudes. We'll catch you next time.
Later, dudes.